Imagine the smell. Not just of smoke and burnt earth, but of death. A thick, sweet, cloying stench that clings to the back of your throat. A perfume of putrefaction carried on the wind for miles. Before you, rising against the desolate skyline of a city in ruins, is a monument not of stone or gold, but of human heads. 10,000 of them. 20,000. More. Eyes staring blankly into eternity, mouths agape in silent screams. This is not a nightmare. This was the calling card of a man who turned cruelty into an art form. A man whose name, even 6 centuries later, is whispered with a unique kind of dread Tamerlane. What he did to his enemies will not just leave you speechless. It will haunt you. To understand the monster, we must first understand the man and his world. He was born Timur in 1336, in the heart of what is now Uzbekistan. This was a fractured, violent era. The colossal empire of Genghis Khan had splintered, leaving a power vacuum filled by warring tribes and petty kings. Into this chaos stepped Timur. He was not of royal blood, no direct descendant of the great Khan. He was a minor noble, a sheep, raider in his youth. But he possessed 3 things in terrifying abundance: limitless ambition, a brilliant military mind, and a capacity for cruelty that bordered on the demonic. He called himself the Sword of Islam, yet his sword fell just as often on Muslims as it did on Christians or Hindus. His goal was simple, grandiose, and terrifying: to rebuild the Mongol Empire, not in Genghis Khan's image, but in his own. And his philosophy of conquest was brutally efficient. To those who submitted without a fight, he could be a patron of the arts, a builder of magnificent cities like Samarkand. But to those who dared to resist, to them he offered only one thing: a lesson in the anatomy of terror, taught with fire and steel. He believed that fear was a more potent weapon than any army. A city that witnessed the fate of its neighbor would think twice before barring its gates. It was a strategy of psychological warfare, and its primary tools were massacre, mutilation, and desecration on a scale that beggars belief. A symphony of atrocity. So, what happened when you defied Tamerlane? What was the price of resistance? It began with the siege. Tamerlane's engineers were masters of their craft, but his true weapon was impatience. He would offer terms: surrender now, and your city will be spared. Refuse, and every man, woman, and child within your walls is forfeit. When the walls of Isfahan, in Persia, fell in 1387 after a brief rebellion, Tamerlane gave an order that has echoed through the darkest corridors of history. He demanded a tribute, not of gold, but of heads. His soldiers were commanded to each bring back a set number. The final count was 70,000. They were not buried. They were meticulously stacked into 28 towers. Pyramids of gore built in the public squares as a permanent warning. Can you even conceive of it? A city where the skyline was punctuated by monuments of the dead, a daily reminder of the cost of defiance. But decapitation was, for Tamerlane, almost merciful. His cruelty was inventive, bespoke to the nature of the defiance. In India, after the sack of Delhi in 1398, historical accounts speak of 100,000 Hindu prisoners. Before the main battle, Tamerlane feared they might rise up and attack his army from within. His solution: a preemptive slaughter. Over a single day, 100,000 unarmed men were butchered in his camp. The chroniclers of his own court wrote that not a man, not even a 10-year-old boy, was spared. The river Yamuna ran red with their blood for days. And then there was Baghdad. In 1401, the city, once the glittering heart of the Islamic Golden Age, refused his call to surrender, when his forces inevitably broke through. The slaughter that followed was apocalyptic. It is said 90,000 residents were systematically exterminated. So total was the destruction that Tamerlane ordered his soldiers not to leave a single building standing, except for the mosques. He built 120 towers from the skulls of the slain. The city of 1,001 nights was reduced to a field of rubble and bone. But his most infamous act, the one that perfectly encapsulates his fusion of architecture and atrocity, happened in Sistan. The population had resisted fiercely. As punishment, Tamerlane's army rounded up 2,000 living prisoners. They were not simply executed. They were stacked one on top of the other, like bricks, and bound together with clay and mortar. A wall of living men was constructed, their muffled screams and slow suffocation serving as the foundation of his victory. This wasn't just killing, it was a form of erasure, turning human beings into building materials. It was a statement: your very bodies belong to me, to be used as I see fit. His methods were legion. Children were trampled to death by cavalry horses. Women were enslaved and distributed among his troops. Prisoners of war were sometimes thrown from cliffs or buried alive. He once had 4,000 Armenian soldiers buried alive by covering them in a pit and flooding it with water. There was no line he would not cross. For Tamerlane, mercy was weakness, and terror was the purest expression of power. The psychology of fear. Why such theatrical, almost psychopathic cruelty? Was Tamerlane simply a madman, a sadist who reveled in bloodshed? The terrifying answer is probably not. This was not random violence. It was calculated. It was a tool. Tamerlane was a brilliant strategist, not just on the battlefield, but in the minds of his enemies. Every pyramid of skulls, every wall of living bodies, was a message sent to the next city in his path. It was the most effective propaganda imaginable. The stories of his atrocities would travel faster than his army, carried by terrified refugees. By the time his banners appeared on the horizon, the will to fight had often already evaporated. He was conquering cities with fear before a single soldier had scaled their walls. This was state-sponsored terrorism on an imperial scale. He understood that breaking an enemy's spirit was more important than breaking their lines. By committing acts of unthinkable horror, he created an aura of demonic invincibility. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a force of nature, an act of God's wrath. How can you fight a hurricane? How can you negotiate with an earthquake? His reign of terror ultimately led to the deaths of an estimated 17 million people, about 5% of the world's population at the time. He carved out one of the largest empires in history, stretching from India to Turkey. But it was an empire built on a foundation of bones, held together by the mortar of fear. And like all things built on such foundations, it could not last. It crumbled almost as soon as he was gone. The Echo of Tamerlane. Tamerlane died in 1405 on his way to conquer Ming China. He left behind a legacy of magnificent architecture in Samarkand and a river of blood that flowed across 2 continents. So what are we to make of this man? Where do we draw the line between a military genius who reshaped the world and a genocidal monster who inflicted unimaginable suffering? Is it possible to be both? His story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that history is not a clean narrative of good versus evil. It is written in blood and ambition. And the victors are often those who are willing to commit the most unspeakable acts. The methods may have changed. We no longer see pyramids of skulls outside our cities. But the strategy of using terror to break the human spirit, of using systematic violence to achieve political ends, that has not gone away. From the trenches of World War I to the killing fields of Cambodia, from Rwanda to the modern day horrors we see on our screens, the ghost of Tamerlane lingers. He reminds us that the capacity for calculated, systematic cruelty is a dark and permanent part of the human story. He is a warning etched in bone of what happens when ambition is unchecked by empathy and when power is pursued by any means necessary. The stories of the past are there to teach us, to warn us. If you found this journey into one of history's darkest chapters illuminating, please consider supporting our channel. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe for more deep dives into the shadows of history. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. thank you for watching, and for remembering.